Ireland's attachment to the Catholic Church is straining to breaking point. The secret crimes of Irish priests against children have collapsed the Church's moral authority.
I should be out playing with other 10-year-olds, but I wasn't. I was being taken down to the beach and raped.
Once the bastion of Catholicism on the edge of Europe, successive state inquiries on clerical abuse have revealed ugly secrets and left the Church reeling.
I don't know of any other situation that I'm aware of where the clerical establishment has disintegrated as quickly and as dramatically and as comprehensively as it has in Ireland.
The clerical abuse scandal is far from ended, and it goes to the very top of the Catholic Church in Ireland.
I am 100% certain, I have absolutely no doubt in my mind, I give him the names and addresses of those children.
You know that children were abused because you failed, in part because you failed to protect them.
No, I did what I was there to do.
The Irish Catholic Church once had unquestioned authority, not anymore.
It came in about 2 or 3 years where the entire business of the Church's power over our lives in the Republic of Ireland simply went down and stayed down, and it looks as though it cannot rise.
The official end of Holy Roman Catholic Ireland came last summer with an extraordinary speech by the Irish Prime Minister.
The rape and the torture of children were downplayed or managed to uphold instead the primacy of the institution, its power, its standing, and its reputation.
That landmark speech from a leader rooted in rural Catholic Ireland drew on the anger and frustration of the Irish public. I'm in Donegal, in the very northwest of Ireland. It has the highest rate of allegations of clerical abuse in the country. The Church is set to publish its own report about abuse here in the local Raphoe diocese. It hopes it will help to restore its reputation. Convicted rapist Father Eugene Green attacked children here and in other parts of the county for decades, often in the most remote and beautiful places. It's known the rapist was reported to his superiors many years ago, but until now, bishops have insisted there is no evidence of this. No one knows more about Father Eugene Green and how the Church handled him than retired Detective Martin Ridge. He spent 2 years investigating the crimes of Ireland's most prolific child rapist. We're crossing to Inishbofin Island, a mile off the Donegal coast. No place was safe for children here.
The most beautiful, idyllic place you could imagine to live, where innocence collided with evil. It seemed that the wolves were protected and the innocence of children, the little lambs, weren't. I don't believe a week went by in West Donegal where you hadn't a child or number of children sexually abused. It's horrendous. Anywhere you look around here, which is so hard to fathom, by roads, side roads, in churches, schools, the abuse here was something unbelievable, unbelievable. And the fact that nobody in the public spoke out about this, after the total carnage here.
What happened here?
There's a little compartment just behind here, Dara, just behind this very altar. It was set up in the event of a priest being stuck on the island due to bad weather, you know. And unfortunately, Father Eugene Green led some very young boys up here and abused them, raped them horrifically, just behind this altar here, behind the wall basically. Of course he was abused time and time again, the same boy, but some of the abuse happened here.
The police investigation, which ended with Father Eugene Green being jailed in 2000, found evidence the priest's crimes were covered up, something always denied by the Church, which says there's no documentary proof. What do you expect from the Rafo report in a couple of days' time? Any revelations?
Well, it's hard to see. I mean, the review itself will show what was on files, what was written down. Will it be enough to convince us that all the truth is written down? I don't know. I don't like to be a cynic like St. Thomas, but I only know too well how hard it is to get to the truth in the Catholic Church.
I know that much remains hidden here because I used to call this place home. 14 years ago, I gave up my job as a BBC reporter and moved with family to a new life running a pub restaurant.
Now, Dara, back to the old haunt again. Well, do you think there's any change since you left?
Not a lot of change now.
No?
Most of Father Eugene Green's 26 known victims come from Goethe-Herk, where I lived. Until the police inquiry began, they suffered in silence. One of them worked with me, Martin Gallagher.
This shows exactly where Green served his time. And
Martin shows me the various parishes Father Eugene Green worked and abused in. He believes the priest was moved every time rumours of abuse surfaced.
He served there, and Gidor here, and went to, where were we? Glenties. Down here,
yeah, all the way down the way
there. So they served in Tory Island, under Goethe-Herk, Tory Island, and in Ishboffin. And then he finished up in Kilmacrenan. That's where the last post was. They're moving this priest. It's like spreading a disease from one corner to another. The bishop spread the disease. He had the disease, they spread it. As simple as ABC.
With the Donegal church report imminent, Martin has just now started to speak publicly about his abuse. It began when the 12-year-old was encouraged to drive the priest's car.
He started groping me when I was driving and messing about. My hands were on the wheel, and at that age you were nervous probably of driving and excited and all that, and you kept your hands on the wheel, regardless. And he would carry on just messing. He would stop and change. He would drive and expect the same treatment back from me that he was giving me. Like, I couldn't do that. Like, he was forcing me to do it. Scary, like really scary, because at 12 years old, you were very innocent, very, how would you say, stupid or whatever. That you didn't know any better, like, and it's tough.
Did he ever say anything to you about, this is our secret?
Yeah, he would. Just stop there.
You know, people looking at this just don't understand the devastation, the hurt, the harm that man did.
I don't know whether people will ever understand the hurt he's caused, the lives he's ruined. The lives that have been lost because of him, they could have been prevented, like. If people had taken action.
When he was with you, did he ever mention God? Did he ever?
No. God was the last thing in his mind. He didn't care about God.
John McAteer, editor of the local Tyrconnell Tribune, Donegal born and bred. The church he knew was too powerful, beyond reproach. John, what about the culture of silence that was here? I mean, does that culture of silence still exist?
The culture of silence, I think, is a misnomer to a great extent because of the power and the strength of the hierarchy over the centuries and over the years here in very rural conservative dioceses like Raphoe. There was a culture of fear. Fear that if you reported that you were being abused, you would probably be further abused by your parents for making the allegation. It was a very, very serious situation. And I think that is ingrained into the psyche of the people here in this diocese. And maybe to an extent, that whole history is there to this very day.
You don't think it's gone?
I don't think it's gone, no. Because there's a denial there. And there remains a denial to this very day that to criticise the church is entirely wrong.
That deference is fading, but it is almost impossible to overstate the power the Catholic Church once had. For generations, the Church influenced most aspects of Irish life. Dublin and the Eucharistic Congress of 1932, the Catholic Church was presiding like a new monarchy over the fledgling Irish state, exalted and respected, and feared too. Author Colm Tóibín grew up Catholic in a country town. He's long scrutinised the relationship between the Irish and the institutional church.
Southern Ireland was effectively, after 1922, a Catholic state for a Catholic people. The church was an effective government or shadow government, making it absolutely clear to government that they would control schools, hospitals, and many other areas of public morality. Anyone who didn't like this, there was only one place to go, and that was out. And some people went out looking for work, other people went out looking for freedom. But that was a great release, giving the church further power over those who remained. And there was a nobility and grandeur about them. I mean, the bishop lived in a palace, but even in the towns, the priest's house was often, or in villages, the biggest house, and the curate had a separate house, and they had housekeepers. So there was a sense of their grandeur. They almost replaced landlords, or were a shadow system in the way in which they functioned, and the sense of their distance and grandeur and importance.
Maynooth College was once the world's largest seminary. Thousands of priests left here to work across the globe, my own uncle, Father Noel, among them. That production line is almost closed. Fewer than a dozen priests are expected to be ordained this year. The class photo of 2007 showed just 4 graduating priests. Contrast that with the class of 1954. This is my uncle, Father Noel McIntyre, as you see up here, Nullag McIntyre in the Irish. A decent man, very important to me growing up. Good man, the sort of traditional Irish Catholic parish priest that every community deserved, didn't always get. But he's a good man. You have a sense, don't you, of just an entirely different Ireland looking at this. All these men, 60, 70 men, proudly marching to work for God. But that was a different Ireland. And of course, a different church. That's the point. Across Ireland, bishops have been forced to account for decades of clerical abuse. Can the Church now do the same with the Rafo report? That's the question people are asking in Donegal. People like my old neighbours, the Breslins.
Where was that? Up at Road?
Martin's Aunt Kathleen and her son Paul, who was also abused by Father Eugene Green.
That's me.
Yeah.
That's Martin there.
That's the good looking one.
That's the good looking one's Martin. And we're ugly. That's me little sister.
It's a lovely picture of the two boys.
First Holy Communion.
First Holy Communion with their rosary beads. How tough was it for you at the start when it all happened, when it all came out?
It was really tough. I remember the first night, Martin, the minute he told me, I knew. The minute he said it, I said, I know. When he mentioned Father Green, I knew right away, because I knew he took the two of them. So I knew what happened, because it was kind of starting to come out that time, and I heard, so Martin told me that night, so that was the beginning.
It's always depended on women. The woman represented the church in the house. She decided, what mass you went to. She decided who went to confraternity. Have you been to confession? Was your mother asked you that question?
There was no saying no. You had to go. And that was it. It's changed, surely. There isn't as many going now.
But people remark if you didn't go.
Yeah, them days you had to go.
Not one bishop, not one senior clergyman had stepped out of line, had been brave enough to say, I know more than everyone's saying, and it's wrong. Not one did it. And for women who had brought up children, who had done everything possible in their own households, that was an extraordinary breach of something they fundamentally believed in.
It was hard to believe it, because when you think that he came in here, that he was in this house so often, saying mass, and it was hard to believe it,
Paul Breslin was an altar boy when Father Eugene Green first took him away in his car. Always to quiet, isolated places.
There's so much beauty here, but for me there's so much evil and so much hurt. I should be out playing with other 10-year-olds, but I wasn't. I was being taken down to the beach and raped. Age of 10, 11, 12. I had no life at all. I had no childhood, no fun. Nothing was just pain, pain, pain. Every single week, pain. I would say to myself, why is God doing this to me? I thought God was supposed to care, and the priests were supposed to care and not hurt a person, and I thought maybe I'm doing something wrong here, am I not doing a good enough job as an altar boy that he's punishing me for this? When I gradually went, as I was growing up, when I was 14, 15, even up to 16, you're learning about, everything about, your body and everything, and then I would think, oh my God, these things can happen to me. This is what he fucking done to me. And the pain got even worse then. I was in there, and I couldn't tell anybody. I couldn't go to anybody. They wouldn't believe you anyway to start off with.
It's now clear that survivors have not been spoken to for the upcoming report, which is relying on the Church's own documents. I worry this will disappoint those who I have met.
We weren't involved in this report. We have to speak up, be heard. I want this, I want that. I want to see those files. I want to see that letter of complaint. I want to know why was he moved from this parish. You knew that he was doing it in that parish, but you moved him to the other parish. Why was he then moved from that parish to the other parish?
You want answers?
Of course we want answers. We want answers, big answers, definitely.
Father Eugene Green's crimes might have remained hidden except for one man who'd been brutally abused, Cardinal Melly, telling his story for the very first time in public.
You'll never forget it. It's with you for the rest of your life. And there's nothing you can do about it.
He has no faith that the Church will admit to a cover-up. After a chance meeting in 1997, he tried to get Green to admit to his crimes.
That was, well, probably maybe a month after it. I went down and confronted him.
What did you say to him?
I told him I asked him did he remember me, and he said no. And I said, you remember abusing me when I was young? He says he never abused anyone. Never.
So, and what did you say to him? What did you do to him?
I caught him and flung him across the room. He was like, it was different then. I was a lot bigger than him.
What age had you been when he had abused you?
About 11.
You were a tiny child?
Yeah.
It was different now?
Yeah, it was different now.
So you picked him up and you?
I picked him up and flung him across the room.
And what did you say to him?
I can't remember exactly what I said to him, but I said I would fucking kill him. I think that's why it frightened him.
But he still didn't admit to knowing you?
No, he did not. He never admitted knowing me.
Connell then told the priest he wanted compensation, £5,000.
But what did he do?
Well, he reported it to the guards. He reported me to the guards. Why, as if, I don't know, like as if he was innocent. Or he must have thought the guards would believe him.
Connell was arrested for attempted blackmail, but Father Eugene Green had miscalculated. The police were now prepared to believe the former altar boy and not the man with the Roman collar. Dozens of victims came forward. Father Eugene Green was convicted and sentenced to 12 years in prison. But what the Church knew was never explained.
The big change then came from a number of individuals, because when the victims began to speak, when you saw somebody describing what their adulthood was like in the shadow of what had happened to them, there was an element of shame in this, that they'd been living with this. This had been going on in front of everyone's noses.
The big question across Ireland this morning: will the report into Donegal's Raphoe diocese help restore the Church's reputation? What they're predicting in today's papers, the Irish Times, criticism likely for Raphoe bishops on child sex claims, right? If that is the sum of it, if it's just simply a mild criticism, that's not going to satisfy them. Absolutely not. I mean, at one point they would have been anxious for heads to roll. They know that's not going to happen now. But they absolutely want the Church to own up, to fess up, to confess their role in hiding and covering up the crimes for more than 3 decades of Father Eugene Green.
Email seandoherty@highlandradio.com.
10 a.m, the local bishop, Philip Boyce, goes live on morning radio.
Well, it's an important day for the Diocese of Raphoe because the much anticipated report has just...
Retired detective Martin Ridge waiting to hear if any new information is revealed.
Nothing was done at the time. Now, we are talking about the late 70s, and there wasn't such awareness of child abuse at that time, and there certainly wasn't awareness of the damage.
There was awareness of it at the time.
To children, sometimes lifelong damage. Our parishes, as far as humanly is possible, a safe place for our children, because after all, our children are...
Pathetic, listen to that.
Our most precious possession.
Self-serving words, I know more.
The society. I have spent endless hours and given much time and energy to eradicating this evil, repairing what is damaged as best I could, restoring justice and putting structures in place to prevent, as far as possible, this criminal sin from happening again. Finally, I would like to take this opportunity to say that the task of ensuring the safeguarding of young people in the Diocese of Bridgeport is an ongoing one. Thank you. And
Bishop Boyce, can I ask you, pointedly, there is no specific criticism of bishops or of the church in the way they handled Father Eugene Green, one of the country's most prolific paedophiles. There is no specific criticism of the way the church or successive bishops handled him, including yourself. Does this report then, in your terms, exonerate bishops in the church in the way they handled?
I'm not saying that it exonerates everybody. It just shows that at the time, the information on these terrible things that happened weren't handed up as far as, let's say, as the bishop's office. And that word of that didn't come to us because there was no reference whatsoever to any allegation in the files which I saw when I came in.
The Church never intended the report to thoroughly investigate the past. It was restricted to an examination of diocesan files, and because nothing was found in the files, that is where it ended. It's clear that significant errors in judgment were made by successive bishops when responding to child abuse allegations that emerged within this diocese. But there's no reference to Father Eugene Green himself. I know if I was one of those who'd been attacked by Father Eugene Green, or if my brother or my child had been attacked by Father Eugene Green, and this is the sum of knowledge that the Church is admitting to now, I'd be absolutely outraged. I'd be furious. At the Tyrconnell Tribune newspaper, the presses are underway by late afternoon. The editor has made up his mind.
My biggest criticism of it, apart from that, is that here you have a nodded into clerical sex abuse. There is no terms of reference to talk to the abused. And you just ask the question, how can a report of any kind be completed without talking to the victims? Remember that a lot of these survivors have spent 35, 40 years literally imprisoned in their own minds, imprisoned in their own communities, and to a great extent have been hospitalised in psychiatric wards, have had nervous breakdowns, have had serious bouts of alcoholism, have had thoughts of suicide. The scenario is absolutely horrendous. And yet you contrast that against how the Church has handled it and how the institutions of the Church have totally failed those people. And today's audit, to me, does nothing to address their concerns and their health problems.
What will your front page say tonight?
We'll be simply saying that diocesan audit is a whitewash.
A whitewash.
A whitewash.
It's very difficult if you put such an important organisation on the run, as it were, that they simply will have no idea how to behave, how often to look back as they run, you know, how frightened to look, how apologetic to look, how to avoid the worst catastrophe. So it's not as though you could say, oh, there was one way the Church should have functioned at the very beginning. The issue is that the Church had such power, and that power became abuse, and that abuse was sexual abuse, and that happened to so many vulnerable young people whose lives were destroyed, and that has to be dealt with.
The failure of the Catholic hierarchy to deal with abusing priests was not just confined to Donegal. One story still unresolved goes all the way to the very top of the Irish Catholic Church and could have explosive consequences. It involves Cardinal Sean Brady, Primate of all Ireland.
The last few days have been among the most extraordinary.
And the country's most notorious paedophile priest, Father Brendan Smith. At its centre, a boy who in 1975 reported Smith's abuse to the Cardinal, hoping to end the abuse of him and other children. What Brendan Boland didn't know was that the institution in which he and his family held so much faith would in fact conspire to silence him.
What age were you when this all started?
Well, when I was an old boy, I was 11 years old.
You were just 11?
Just 11, yeah.
And how long did it carry on for?
It carried on for over 2 years.
Smith, who abused for 4 decades, often took children on marathon excursions in his car up and down the island. Brendan remembers one particular trip to Dublin.
Got in the car and we went to Belfast and we picked up 2 children in Belfast. And then we drove from Belfast to Cavan. We picked a girl up in Cavan. We went to pick another boy up in Cavan. And then we went back to the bed and breakfast. And there was 2 bedrooms. There was one for the girls and one for Father Smith and the 2 boys.
That was you and another boy?
Me and another boy from Belfast. And he called me over first and he abused me the way he did before. And when he was finished with me, I went back to the bed and then he called the other boy over and done the same with him. And this time I was in the bed watching. Well, I was listening. I didn't want to watch.
It was a little afterwards in 1975 that Brendan found the courage to tell a local priest about the abuse. The priest took him straight home to tell his parents. A week or so later, Brendan and his dad were driven to a local monastery. Brendan was led into a room with 3 priests, including Father John B. Brady, now Cardinal Brady, then a 36-year-old teacher, canon lawyer, and bishop's secretary. Brendan was to be questioned, alone. His father was told to stay outside.
I felt alone, scared. I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know what questions were going to ask me. I was only 14 years old at the time there.
And your father wasn't in there with you?
My father wasn't in there with me, no.
Cardinal Brady compiled the answers. Another priest asked the questions. Brendan was asked what Smith did, but also about his own behaviour.
What did they ask you?
Did you ever do anything like this before with another boy or a man, grown man? And I said no, and they said, if not, why not? And they kept asking me, did my body change? Did I get an erection? They asked me then, did seed come from my body? And what kind of questions are they to ask a 14-year-old boy?
Brendan might have been shaken by the nature of the questions, but as the church's own transcript confirms, he was able to tell the priests the names and addresses of other children who Smith was abusing or who were at risk of abuse.
I gave them the names of the other children that were with me on the trips. There was a boy from Belfast. I gave him his name and address. There was a girl from Belfast. I gave him her name and address. There was a girl from Cavan. I gave him her name and address. There was another boy from Cavan. I gave him his name and address. And there was another boy that was his friend.
So were you able to be any more specific about abuse you had seen, you had witnessed?
Yeah, I told him that I witnessed one boy being abused. I told him that.
And who was that?
That was the boy from Belfast.
You told them that this boy had been abused?
I did, yes. Yep. I knew for a fact he was abused. And the other boy from Cavan, he told me he was abused because he didn't like going on the trips either.
The documents verify Brendan's account in black and white.
One of the priests came over, I'm not sure, with a Bible. And he made me put my hand on the Bible and say, I, Brendan Boland, do solemnly swear I have told the truth, the whole truth, and I will speak to no one about this meeting, only to authorised priests. And then I signed it, and the other signature on the document was Father John B. Brady, now Sean Brady, Cardinal of Ireland.
Cardinal Brady still had work to do. He himself conducted a second interview, this time with the Cavan boy Brendan had told him about. The child corroborated Brendan's account. He was sworn to secrecy. Again, Cardinal Brady countersigned the oath. He passed 2 reports to his bishop. The police were told nothing, ever. I've just spoken to the man who, as a 15-year-old boy, was also interviewed by Cardinal Sean Brady. And what he's told me is shocking. He says that his parents were told nothing about his involvement in this secret church investigation. More than that, he says his parents were not told that he was being abused by Father Brendan Smith. The church, of course, said nothing, and he said nothing to anyone, not a soul, because he was sworn to secrecy. I then traced Brendan's friend from Belfast using the same address that the 14-year-old gave all those years ago.
I remember going up to Dublin with Brendan. I think there's about 5 or 6 of us on that trip. Brendan was a nice fella. He was probably as petrified as I was at the time, but and the things, you know, I just felt, in many ways, I felt very guilty too, you know, because I was sharing a room with this other boy, and Smith and his behaviour, and what he'd maybe want us to do and want the way he wanted us to behave. It's unbearable to think about it sometimes, you know.
When I tell him that Cardinal Brady was told in 1975 that he was being abused, that his name is down on paper, he is horrified.
And then, as it transpired that Brendan had mentioned me and that my name and address was actually on these documents as well, it was just like, it's like a knife into your chest. It's like a sudden, sharp pain.
And the reason it hurt so much is that Father Brendan Smith continued to abuse him after 1975. Then his sister for another 7 years, and 4 cousins abused right up until 1988.
Nobody came to our house, or should have came to our house, and warned our family, or my parents, and said, look, this is what's happening. This man is involved in this. We would strictly advise you to keep him away from the house. Okay, maybe I had only another year's abuse to go, but my sister, you know, for years after that, she was abused. And then, lo and behold, cousins after that.
I have spoken to all those who Brendan Boland told the church about in 1975. 4 of the 5 children had been abused by Smith. 2 of them continued to be abused after that secret inquiry. All say that to the best of their knowledge, their families were not warned in any way about the paedophile.
Poor Brendan, actually thought, given this information, he was going to protect me, he was going to protect other people, and thinking this was going to be the end of it. And by God, it is far from the end.
Cardinal Brady's own career took off after 1975. First away to Rome, and then in 1997 made Primate of all Ireland, the senior Catholic in the country. By his own account, he never failed to protect any child.
If I found myself in the situation where I was aware that my failure to act had allowed or meant that other children were abused, well, then I think I would resign.
I'm writing what's called a right of reply letter to Cardinal Brady, telling him what we have discovered point by point. I want to know why he didn't make sure the children he'd been told about were protected. And I want to know why he and the church seemed to minimise his role when it is plain that he carried out the investigation into Smith. When limited news of the church investigation first broke 2 years ago, the church called him a note-taker. He said he was a notary without powers, who did his job.
I insist again, I did act and acted effectively within that inquiry to produce the grounds for removing Father Smith from ministry, and specifically it was underlined that he was not to hear confessions, and that was very important.
The ban on Smith wasn't enforced. Here he is 4 years later at a special mass for the sick. And when Cardinal Brady says he was a notary, his role was in fact that of an investigator, according to his own handwritten note. I was dispatched to investigate the complaint. I needed to find a clear path through the archaic and often confusing world of canon law, the church law that Cardinal Brady was versed in and that he applied to this 1975 case. My guide is the Reverend Thomas Doyle, a world-renowned expert in the field.
He was the investigator. He was deputed to investigate, to lead the investigation, to make sure that it had taken place.
Not simply a note-taker.
No, not simply. That's minimizing what he actually was. He did take notes, but he also prepared the report. And he authenticated the report.
You know that Cardinal Brady insists that he did his job, that he passed the information he had up to his bishop. Did he do his job?
Just to say that I did my duty, I just followed orders, I passed it up the chain, is completely inadequate. I mean, if he didn't do it, he should have told the bishop that the other families need to be notified. If you won't do it, I will do it. You know, the man was not a robot. And these are human beings that he's dealing with here. And so the information was very clear. The testimony that Brendan apparently gave to them was very, very clear and detailed, as well as the names of the others. These are the ones we know about. Now, there could well have been a number of others that could have been prevented, but it was not prevented. That in itself is criminal behavior. Because the bishops, the priests, Brady, they knew that this man was an abuser of children. It wasn't that he was, as I said, slapping their wrists with a ruler in class. He was sexually assaulting them. Nothing happened. Again, a cover-up.
Ultimately, all power in the Catholic Church resides in Rome, with the Pope, who appoints all the bishops, all the cardinals. This is one hierarchy which doesn't pretend to be anything else. Estimates vary, but so far the abuse scandals have cost the Church about £3 billion and counting. Much more vital damage has been done to its reputation and to its moral authority. This day, senior church figures from around the globe are gathering for a conference in Rome, looking at ways of rooting out child abuse. Cardinal Sean Brady heads a small Irish delegation. I've been told that even within the church, Cardinal Brady is seen as a gravely weakened leader. I don't expect to speak to him until he has had time to respond to my letter. But I do want to speak to this man, Monsignor Charles Scicluna. He is one of the most powerful officials in the Catholic Church, the chief prosecutor. Having examined 4,000 cases of clerical abuse, he says accountability and truth are the only way forward.
We need to move on from a culture of silence, and where it is, we need to denounce it for what it is. It is an enemy of truth and an enemy of justice.
I want to know what he thinks about Cardinal Brady. Cardinal Sean Brady was told in 1975 that a young boy was being abused at that particular point. He was given that man's name, that boy's address, where he lived, and yet that boy was abused for another year. His sister was abused for 7 years. His 4 first cousins were abused until 1988. Many years past the 1975 information that Cardinal Sean Brady now primate of all Ireland was given that information.
What you're telling me helps us emphasize the fact that when we talk about an adequate response and we're talking about abuse happening, it cannot be a delayed response. The response to disclosure should be immediate and effective. And that is why the law was changed in 2010, because we are on a learning curve, giving the bishop authority to remove a priest as a precaution measure immediately.
Cardinal Sean Brady said in 2009 that he would resign if he thought that any failing on his part meant or led to any child being abused. He said he would resign. Should he not resign now?
I think that is a question you have to put to Cardinal Brady.
You are the chief prosecutor as such in terms of the canon law. Do you not have an opinion on this?
I have my opinion and I will keep it to myself.
This is about accountability? You've spoken about accountability today?
Yes, and I think that what I've said about accountability is that the Holy See has a duty to bring bishops to accountability. Is something that needs to be done and needs to be effected, but this is where I stop with my comments on an individual case.
Victims say the key is to get individuals, to get bishops, to get the church to acknowledge its responsibility. You've heard that time and time again. Here is another case where a bishop, a cardinal, is not acknowledging his responsibility, his personal responsibility.
I repeat that this is something that should be put to Cardinal Brady directly. And I will talk to him because he is in town about what you've told me. I will bring your concerns to him because I think that that is a duty I have in charity.
Thank you. Clarity of the prayers of Cardinal Sean Brady seeking forgiveness. The problem he has, and the problem the church has, is that many people, especially those affected by what he did or didn't do back in 1975, well, they want more than his prayers. They want him to acknowledge his own personal responsibility for what happened. They want his resignation.
We live in the age of apology, so that watching the church, learning, and obviously they got a great deal of help from PR companies in how to do this, how to present themselves as totally sorry. And, you know, sorry became the easiest word to say. Apologize, apologize. But everyone was watching something else. Everyone was watching that they were not coming with full disclosure. And the full disclosure was that they knew that priests were moved from place to place with a large number of other priests knowing exactly what the issues were. And parents watching this knew that was not something that parents would have done in Ireland to other parents. And the church did it to them.
Cardinal Brady never replied to the questions in my letter, so I went and put them to him directly. Cardinal Brady, Dara McIntyre from the BBC. Cardinal Brady, I'd like to ask you a couple of questions, if you don't mind.
No, I'm not. Thanks very much, but I'm not.
Cardinal Brady,
I'm not ready.
You said that you would resign if you thought that any action of yours had led to a child being abused. I'm not. You know that children were abused because you failed, in part because you failed to protect them.
No, I did what I was there to do. I took the evidence.
You had names and addresses, Cardinal, of children who were being abused or who were at risk of being abused, and you did not protect them.
Sorry, lads. Excuse me.
Cardinal Brady? Cardinal Brady, was the protection of the church's reputation more important than the protection of the children? You had the names and addresses of children who were being abused or who were at risk of being abused. You failed to protect them, Cardinal. He's again deliberately, willfully refusing to take responsibility for his actions, for his inactions, which left children exposed to abuse. So resplendent with power and authority was the Catholic Church in Ireland its fall from grace was bound to be spectacular. But no one could ever have imagined that the Catholic Church would be so trenchantly criticised by an Irish Prime Minister.
The rape and the torture of children were downplayed or managed to uphold instead the primacy of the institution, its power, its standing, and its reputation.
The Irish government has closed its embassy to the Vatican. Dublin and the Holy See want to play down tensions, yet it is clear that the Church is now having to pay a price for the grip it held Ireland in for so long. And as the Cardinal Brady case illustrates, it has not finished accounting for its sins just yet.
Holy Roman Catholic Ireland, the Ireland that you and I grew up with, where is it now?
It doesn't exist anymore, and people have discovered that in abandoning their relationship to the official church and their loyalty to it, they've lost almost nothing.
They haven't lost their faith?
No, if you ask them questions about, for example, the next life or eternal life or other matters, if you ask them matters about religion, I think, you could find that maybe very little has changed. But in relationship to the church, everything has changed.
Church attendance has more than halved across Ireland, but this ancient ritual is still very much alive. For more than 500 years, believers have celebrated the New Year with a procession to Donegal at Termon in Donegal. The ceremony ends with the blessing of the holy water of Donegal. The water is said to have special healing powers. It is in great demand.
The faith lives on in the people. This faith is not dependent on bishops and cardinals or the hierarchical structure as such. They're aware of it, but this is a very much, I use the word, earthed faith.
Lady of love, my Queen of peace, and the Lamb will conquer, and the woman clothed in the sun will shine her light on every dawn. Yes, the Lamb will conquer, and the woman clothed in the sun will shine her light on every dawn.
In Donegal, the policeman who investigated the Father Eugene Green case remains sceptical the Church will ever deal honestly with abuse.
People who knew about this, I find them so revolting, because it's them, that did something. And I believe they protected an image rather than protecting a child. And I believe that's where the whole fraud lies, that the premise of trust was used to bury the most graphic horror. This not would be tolerated in any civilized society. And for any institution to use its power to bury this horror, I believe those people should be sent to jail basically for those grave crimes. And until that day arrives that everybody is equal, then I think we're only shadow boxing with this.
Still others, like Martin Gallagher, live with the daily reminders of the damage to their lives.
This is part of my life I'll never know anything about. I know that I was very happy in my childhood before this. I got on great with everybody and it was fun, like normal children have. But from the age of 12 on, I don't know where it could be or what I could have been. I might have been just still the ordinary Martin, but without this cross to carry every day of my life.
For the first time since their ordeal almost 40 years ago, Brendan meets his old friend from Belfast. There may be a future for them supporting each other through the memories of an appalling experience that no child should ever endure.
Oh my God, buddy, how are you? How are you doing? Oh, so good to see you. And you. 38 years now. 38 years.
I know, bro.
God.
I know. I'll take off. How you keeping?
Not bad.
Yeah.
You?
I'm alright, my friend.
Glad to see you.
You've been through the wars too.
And you?
Huh?
I thought I saved you.